that old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
Douglas MacArthur was born on January 26, 1880 in Little Rock, Arkansas. His mother, Mary MacArthur, and father, Arthur MacArthur, had a big impact on his childhood. Arthur was a major in the United States Army. What this meant for Arthur was that he lived on military outposts on the frontier. Douglas once claimed that he could shoot a gun before he could read and ride a horse before he could write his name. He was constantly surrounded by military personnel. This led Douglas into joining the military for himself to try and follow in his father's footsteps. He attended West Point Academy and exceeded expectations. He graduated first in his class and set the stage for his entire military career. Once graduating from West Point, he spent a decade being a junior officer in the Army Corps of Engineers. He continued to show his intelligence and kept receiving promotions. This meant that his post kept changing, so he bounced around from post to post in countries like the Philippines, Japan, Mexico, and in France. When Douglas MacArthur was posted in France, World War I commenced. With him showing military intelligence, he was promoted to major quickly. His main contribution to World War I was making sure that all of the soldiers going into battle were trained and prepared. He started going to different posts and making sure all soldiers were up to his standard. MacArthur then got promoted to colonel of the 42nd Division, which was known as the Rainbow Division. This made him the youngest division commander in the war. The Rainbow Division was part of the United States National Guard and served in World War I, World War II, and helped and continues to help in global terrorism. In World War I, MacArthur started to build up his recognition and gain interest from higher up rankings. After World War I was finished, MacArthur won more awards than any other Valor from the war. This was shown when he was said to have been the greatest frontline general in the war. This prestigious status made the United States Army appoint him as a superintendent of West Point. He was in this position for 3 years and helped train West Point students to prepare for future wars.
By 1930, MacArthur had risen to Chief of Staff of the Army. By the mid-1930s, he had retired from the U.S. Army and supervised the creation of the Philippine Army.
In 1941, MacArthur was recalled to active service to defend the Philippines in World War II. After the attacks on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese turned their attention to MacArthur, who was the leader in the Philippines. Lack of soldiers and airplanes hampered their ability for success. MacArthur ordered his men to retreat to the mountains of the Bataan Peninsula. They fought for almost a half a year, fending off the Japanese, where MacArthur was then ordered by President Roosevelt to leave Australia to carry out the fight from there. It was a struggle for MacArthur to leave the Philippines. MacArthur said, "I came out of Bataan and I shall return." In Australia, he prepared men for combat and waited for enemy forces. MacArthur had another idea, though. He stayed true to his word on returning to the Philippines. MacArthur wanted to bring the war back to the enemy. He guided the military through many successful invasions, taking back enemy islands. They successfully fought and gained control of the Philippines again. Along the way, MacArthur rescued men put in Japanese camps. MacArthur was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in the Southwest Pacific. He was also given the Medal of Honor for his defense of the Philippines.
After World War II, MacArthur served Allied commander of the Japanese occupation, where he introduced democracy to the island. In 1950, MacArthur again became the Supreme Commander of the United Nations forces during the defense of South Korea. He promised new Korean President Syngman Rhee that the U.S. would defend Korea as if it was its own. However, Truman did not agree to that.
The trust between MacArthur and the Koreans was put to the test. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea. MacArthur, staying true to his promise, ordered the shipment of supplies to help the South Korean efforts, which, against Truman's wishes, made the United States a part of the Korean War. This was the first act of defiance by MacArthur toward Truman. For 2 days straight, MacArthur kept trying to convince Truman that the Korean War was a war worth fighting. 2 days later, on June 27th, Truman approved the use of the United States air and naval forces to help protect South Korea.
One major problem was that Truman did not allow ground forces to be put in place in order to assist South Korea. On June 30th, Truman gave MacArthur his authority to use ground forces in the Korean War, which now fully committed the United States into the Korean War. One conflict that began to arise was MacArthur wanted to protect Formosa, but Truman wanted to keep Formosa neutral. Eventually, General MacArthur wrote a letter to the veterans of the Foreign Wars Convention in Chicago pleading his case about intervening in Formosa. This letter went public and made President Truman so furious that he almost relieved MacArthur as general due to MacArthur undermining him. This caused Truman to keep his eye out for MacArthur. MacArthur wanted to continue pushing his limits and started drawing up the plans for Operation Chromite.
From that point, he was sort of watching every move he made. And then when he started talking to the press, MacArthur did, that was sort of the last straw.
What this operation focused on was Incheon, a town in North Korea. What made this operation so risky was that it was behind enemy lines. MacArthur wanted to send spies into Incheon in order to scope out the town and report back on where the placement of North Korean defenses. When MacArthur proposed this operation to Truman, Truman was very skeptical and did not give permission for this operation at first. In addition to Truman, the Navy was also skeptical, since they would be the units actually landing in Incheon. Finally, Truman reluctantly approved of Operation Chromite. From the information that MacArthur received from the spies, he decided that the 15th of September would be the best time to initiate Operation Chromite, due to the sea levels being high, which allowed the Navy to land in Incheon easily. In this battle, the United States lost over 200 men and had over 800 people wounded. This many casualties in a war that the United States did not need to be in angered President Truman.
General MacArthur continued to publicly disagree with the government's policies. Finally, on April 11, 1951, President Truman held a press conference about why he released General MacArthur from all of his commands. MacArthur was dismissed from his duties after he publicly challenged and opposed the policies of his government. General MacArthur created a dangerous, self-isolating little world, one of total social, political, and military situation. As Max Hastings commented, on the assumption that the rules made for lesser men had no relevance to himself. Main issue between MacArthur and Truman was whether the conduct of limited warfare is compatible with continuing civilian supremacy over the military.
So I think his biggest mistake was thinking that either the president would just be overwhelmed by his expertise, or the president would just let him do it because he was MacArthur. So in a way it was kind of his own personality, his enormous ego, and the fact that he was already a war hero, and I think he just felt like he knew best. And so the Constitution never really seemed to cross his mind.
MacArthur was dismissed for 3 reasons. He had failed to submit his statements for clearance in accordance with the President's directives of December 6, ordering all military and civilian officials overseas to exercise extreme caution in public statements and to clear all but routine statements. But with the Defense or State Departments respectively, he challenged the President's role as the nation's spokesman on foreign policy, and he was not in sympathy with the decision to try to limit the conflict to Korea and Washington, thought it was necessary to have a commander more responsive to control of Washington.
On April 19, 1951, MacArthur came home to a hero's welcome. He gave a speech to a joint session of Congress. This presented his side of the case. He stated in his speech, the United States must win the war in Korea and add the Korean Peninsula to Japan, the Philippines, and Formosa as outposts of the free world in Asia. The end of his speech stirred up a lot of controversy with Americans when he said, "I now close my military career and just fade away." In an address to the American Legion Convention in Miami, Florida on October 17, 1951, MacArthur reiterated the importance of the United States and its allies to maintain an island defense chain off the Asian continental coast, which must be preserved at any cost.
MacArthur adds, to maintain that position, we must remain undisputed controls of the seas to secure undisputed control of the air. MacArthur would spend the remaining 12 years of his life living in New York with his wife Jean. MacArthur died in the Army's Walter Reed Hospital on April 5, 1964. Although his career was controversial, he is still considered an American hero.
But as it is, I can't think of another commander anywhere who's come anywhere close to challenging their commander-in-chief since then, through all the wars and conflicts since Korea. So I think a basic principle that is a constitutional principle was tested and upheld, and that's really important for the country.